This is my command center. You're a janitor. Get out of this building.
Getaways, the North Reach is going to fail.
Do not touch my operations map. Security, get her out.
You have 90 minutes. Evacuate the town now.
Dale Corrigan is the County Emergency Management Director. And right now, he is the incident commander for the worst flood event the region has seen in 70 years. The Sirrah River 11 feet over flood stage and climbing. A levee system from the 1960s, straining against a surge nobody modeled for. An emergency operations center full of radios and laptops and exhausted people. And a town of 4,000 downstream in the dark and the rain. He is 50 in a county windbreaker. And he has turned from the radio bank to find a heavy-set black woman in a soaked, shapeless coat at his map table, with her finger on the levee. His brain files her in under a second. Janitor. Confused. Off the street. A problem I do not have time for. He does not ask her name. He does not ask why a woman would walk into a flood emergency talking about surge timing and the Dawson Cut. He plants a hand on her shoulder and shoves. And his other hand sweeps the stack of overlays and her tablet off the map table to clear the space. And they go down with a clatter. The tablet skidding across the wet floor. The old woman staggers, catches the table edge, does not fall. Her eyes never leave the map. You're going to lose the town if you hold the crews at the south wall. The south wall isn't the failure point. The North Reach is. The water always goes for the old cut. It's where the river Times wants Times to be. It's where it was before they straightened it in '61. And tonight, it's going to take it back. Move the crews north. How dare you? Corrigan is shaking. And he pitches it to the room now. To the dozen people at the radios. Performing the command. Some woman wanders in out of the rain and tells me how to run a flood fight in Times My Times EOC. You don't even know what a hydrograph is. You can't read that map. Tucker! Where is get this woman out before she gets somebody killed touching the wrong thing? The woman is 73 years old. Her name is Dr. Steig, Odessa Lattimore. And she is, though, no one in this room will understand it for another 8 minutes, the retired chief hydrologist of the Regional River Authority, the foremost living expert on the Sirrah, called in 2 hours ago by the Times State Times Emergency Management Director herself as an emergency consultant when the surge models started disagreeing. She drove 90 minutes through the storm to get here. She came in the coat because it was raining sideways, and a hydrologist's pension does not buy rain gear that matters. She came straight from the car, soaked, to a map table she has read for 50 years. And the surge model, the EOC, is running tonight. The Early Warning Index, the whole region's flood response is built on, is Times hers. Built on her work, credited, for 30 years, to another name. A sheriff's deputy the size of a door comes through the EOC door. Ma'am, let's go. Son, that town is going to drown if they hold north, if they hold Times south. Don't put your hands on me. I'm trying to save 4,000 people. But the deputy already has her by the arm, hauling her back from the table. And someone's coffee goes over, and her tablet is still spinning on the wet floor, and a radio is crackling with a crew leader at the south wall asking for more sandbags at the wrong place. And Dr. Odessa Lattimore has walked, half-dragged out the EOC door into the screaming rain. And the last thing she does before the door slams is plant her feet and say it one more time. Loud. Over the storm. The North Reach. The Dawson Cut. 90 minutes. Evacuate Sable Bend. Somebody write it down. The door bangs shut. Inside. Dale Corrigan turns back to a map with the crews in the wrong place. And outside. In the rain. The deputy lets go of an old woman who does not rub her arm. Does not raise her voice. and looks at the dark river through the downpour with the face of a person who has watched this exact thing happen before to her grandmother. In this same valley, 69 years ago, the clock on the EOC wall reads 9:41 p.m. If she is right, the Northreach fails at 11:10. One person comes out into the rain after her. Miss Lurline Pace, 84. A lifelong resident of Sable Bend who came to the EOC because her grandson is on a sandbag crew and she could not sit home. And who has just watched, through the open door, something she cannot unsee. Why'd they push you? You said the Northreach. My house is below the Northreach. Lurline grabs her wet sleeve. Who times you? My name is Odessa Lattimore. Odessa says, already pulling out her phone under the awning, shielding it from the rain. I'm the hydrologist the state sent. And that man just threw me out of the room while your river decides whether your town lives. She looks at Lurline's face, really looks, and something stops her for half a second. Pace. Lurline Pace. You were in the 55 flood. You were a child. Lurline stares. How do you know that? Inside, a young watch analyst named Renee Salas, 24, 8 months on the job. The one who plotted tonight's surge is staring at the door, having heard every word, and she is looking at the model running on her own screen, the model footer that reads Time Syrah Surge Index, and at the wet tablet on the floor, and her stomach is somewhere in the floodwater. She picks up the tablet. The lock screen is still lit. It reads, Dr. O. Lattimore Regional River Authority, RET. Real talk, the woman that director just had dragged into the rain for being the janitor, she built the model on his screen. The Syrah Surge Index that the entire EOC is running tonight to decide who lives, it's hers. And she just told him 3 times exactly where the levee will fail and exactly how long they have. And the reason she knows the river will take the old cut isn't only the model. It's a story about her grandmother that is going to break this whole valley open. To understand how we got here, we have to go back. Not 8 minutes. 69 years. If you have ever known how to stop the disaster in a room that decided you couldn't possibly know, drop one word in the comments. We'll know what it means. Because what happens in the next 90 minutes? With 4,000 people asleep below a failing levee. Not one person in that command center is ready for Odessa Lattimore learned to read a river before she learned to read a book. Her grandmother was Vesta Lattimore, and Vesta was a river woman in the black settlement of Lattimore Landing, a community of farmers and fishers that had lived on the lowland inside the Syrah's Big North Bend since their people came up out of slavery and took the only land nobody white wanted, the land that flooded. Vesta had no degree, no instruments, no title. What she had was the river. She had grown up on it, and her mother had grown up on it. And she knew it the way you know a person you have slept beside your whole life. She knew its moods, its sounds, the particular low growl it made in its throat before it rose, the smell of the mud when it was about to come over. She could stand on the bank at midnight and tell you, to the hour, when the water would top the bank and which way it would come. She was right so often that the people of Lattimore Landing did not wait for the county. They waited for Vesta. In the spring of 1955, the Syrah rose in a storm like tonight's. And the county's gauge, the official one, the one the white engineers trusted, read safe. The county did not call an evacuation, but Vesta Lattimore stood on the bank at 2 a.m. and heard the river talking low in its throat, the way it talked before it took everything. And she knew the gauge was wrong because the gauge was upstream of the bend, and the bend was where the water always went. She walked Lattimore Landing door to door in the dark and the rain and got every soul out onto the high ground at the church. with the livestock and the babies and old Miss Pace's family hours before the county knew anything was wrong. At Patru, A.M., the Syrah came over the north bank exactly where Vesta said it would. Not one person from the landing died. Downstream, where the gauge had said safe and no one was warned, 11 people drowned. The county never credited her. The official flood report of 1,955 attributed the low death toll in the Bend to fortunate local awareness. Fortunate local awareness. A black woman walked a settlement out of a flood in the dark with her own 2 ears. And the record called it luck. The county did. However, take one thing from the disaster. It noted the Bend was the failure point. And 20 years later, when they straightened and levied the Syrah, the engineers privately consulted the old accounts of where the water went. Vesta's knowledge laundered through a report that did not bear her name to decide where to build the wall. Vesta taught her granddaughter the river. Not the math, she had no math, but the thing under the math. She would take young Odessa to the bank at night and make her close her eyes and listen. And she would say the thing Odessa would build her whole life on. The water always tells the truth. Baby. People lie about the water, the gauges lie. The engineers lie. They tell you what they want to be true, but the water never lies. You learn to hear it talking low. And you'll know a thing before the proud men with the instruments do. And when you know it, you walk the people out. You don't wait for permission. You walk them out. Odessa took the river her grandmother gave her and got it credentialed. Scholarship. State University. The only black woman in the hydrology program. A doctorate. The River Authority. And she did the thing her grandmother could not. She put the river's truth into math. She built a surge model, a way of predicting, from the river's behavior, exactly where and when a levee would fail, that accounted for the thing the old engineers missed and Vesta always knew, which is that a straightened river remembers its old channel and reaches for it under stress. Her model predicted failure points the standard models missed. It was, when she finished it in the early 1990s, the best flood surge prediction tool the region had ever had. She gave it to her supervisor for review. His name was Dr. Warren Stahl, the director of the authority's research division, a man who had never once stood on a riverbank at midnight in his life. Stahl read it. Then Stahl presented it to the board, to the state, to the journals as the product of his research division. And over the years it became known, in every agency that used it, as the Stahl Index. Warren Stahl wrote it to a national reputation and an obituary in 2009 that called him the father of modern regional flood forecasting. Dr. Odessa Lattimore appears in the authority's official history in one place, a 1,994 staff photo. Back row. Unnamed. Captioned, Research Division Personnel. Odessa did not fall apart. That is not what Vesta raised. She kept refining the model that bore another man's name and kept walking people out of floods for 30 more years. Because the river didn't care whose name was on the index. What she cared about was that when the water talked low, somebody listened. She retired as chief hydrologist in 2018. She kept a box under her bed, her grandmother's, with a hand-drawn map of the 1,955 flood in Vesta's own marks. Every house in Lattimore Landing and an arrow at the North Bend, reading times, water comes here times, and the original 1,991 model notebook in Odessa's hand. Oh, Lattimore per on the cover. 6 weeks ago, no. Tonight. Tonight, the Syrah rose like 1,955. And the state's surge models started disagreeing with each other. And the state emergency management director, A woman named Audra Vey, who had read the authorities' history and knew exactly whose work the Stahl Index really was. Did the thing the county in 1955 did not. She called the one person alive who could read this river. And she said, "Dr. Lattimore, I need you at the Sable Bend EOC tonight. I don't trust these models, and you're the only one who knows what this river actually does." And Odessa Lattimore, 73, got in her car in the storm and drove 90 minutes to the valley her grandmother walked out of in 1955. She did not get a badge. There was no time. The state director was still en route from the capital. So when Odessa walked into the EOC, soaked to the skin, and looked at the map and saw the crew's mast at the south wall while the river reached for the Old North, cut exactly the way it reached in 1955. Exactly the way her model predicted, and her grandmother's ears had always known, and she stepped to the table to move them. The county incident commander looked at the foremost expert on the river, about to drown his town, and saw a confused old janitor, and had her thrown into the rain. 69 years after the county called Vesta, Lattimore's life-saving knowledge, fortunate local awareness. Her granddaughter was dragged out of the command center for the same reason. A black woman could not possibly know where the water would go. Let's rewind. Fast. Because the clock is running toward 11:10, and they will count every minute of it at the inquiry that follows. The Syrah goes over flood stage at 6 p.m. B. Osham. The surge is faster than any model predicted, and the county's standard tool and the state's tool disagree on the failure point. The county says the south wall, where the freeboard is lowest, the physics. If you know the river, say the north reach, where the old channel pulls. Dale Corrigan, the incident commander, goes with the county tool because it is his tool and it says the thing that is easier to defend. And he commits the sandbag cruise to the south wall at 8:40. Audra Vey, the state director, sees the model disagreement from the Capitol at 7:30 and makes 2 calls, one to scramble to the EOC herself, 90 minutes out in the storm, and one to Dr. Odessa Lattimore. Because Vey knows the Stahl Index is really Lattimore's and knows its author can read what the tools are missing. Odessa is on the road by 7:50. She arrives at 9:38, soaked, badgeless, and walks into an EOC committing its cruise to the wrong wall. Dale Corrigan is 50. He has run the county EM office for 11 years. He refers to the EOC as my command center, the crews as my people, the event as my incident. He can read a room, he says, and tell the operators from the spectators at a glance. What that red keys on is never said in those words. But Renee Salas, the young watch analyst, has been on the job 8 months and seen it. She watched him route a visiting black state engineer to the public information table. She watched him assume the only black woman on the GIS team was custodial and ask her to deal with a spill. She started a note on her phone after the spill. It has 5 entries. The line that becomes a hashtag, times, get this woman out before she gets somebody killed, times, leaves Corrigan's mouth at 9:40 p.m. The EOC records its operations floor for after-action review. It is policy. Renee Salas's phone catches it too. Every device catches the same thing, the shove. The overlays and the tablet crashing to the floor. You don't touch. You don't talk. Get this woman out. The deputy's hands. And clear over the radios Odessa Lattimore, saying, times the north reach. The Dawson cut. 90 minutes. Evacuate Sable Bend. Somebody write it down. Odessa is put into the rain at Utiksen, Nelyakumentakaks. She does not call the police. She does not call the press. She pulls out her phone and calls the one person who can fix this from inside in the next 60 seconds. Audra Vey. The state director, who is 40 minutes out on a flooded highway. It rings once. Doctor. Lattimore, are you at the EOC? What are the models? Odra. Your incident commander just shoved me out of the building. He thinks I'm a janitor. He's got the crews at the south wall and the rivers taking the north. Reach the old cut. Odra. Exactly like 55. And he won't hear it. I'm standing in the parking lot in the rain. The town has 90 minutes. A half-second of silence. Then Vay's voice goes flat and fast. He did times what? Threw me out. Odra. Physically. Swept my tablet onto the floor and had a deputy walk me out. And the model on his own screen telling him the surge timing, it's mine. It's the index. He's running my own work, and he threw me in the rain. Her voice does the thing it has not done in 30 years. It's 55 again. The gauge is wrong and nobody will walk the people out. A breath. Doctor. Lattimore. Do not move from that lot. I am calling that EOC on the command channel right now. I am calling the county judge, and I am ordering them to put you back at that table. You are going to save that town tonight. Hold on. She hangs up. Renee Salas is the one who moves first. Before the call lands. She is 24. 8 months on the watch desk. She plotted tonight's surge with her own hands. And she has been quietly uneasy about the south wall since 8:40. Because her own numbers kept pulling north, and Corrigan kept saying the county tool was good enough. She was 6 feet away when an old woman in a soaked coat put her finger on the north reach and said, "Times, the river wants its old channel." And unlike everyone else, Renee did the thing they teach you, and almost no one does, under a commander's certainty. She listened to the times, information, not the person. The old Dawson cut. The straightened river reaches for its old channel under stress. That is not what a confused janitor says. That is the failure mode in the index documentation, the one Renee read in training. The one she could never find the author of. Because the author's name was scrubbed off the front, and only Times stall index times remained. She does the bravest thing a junior analyst can do, which is to contradict the incident commander on the floor of his own EOC. "Sir, Dale. The woman you put out," she said the old channel reach. The Dawson cut. That's the failure mode in the index docs. Our south wall hold assumes a uniform overtop model, and the surge isn't behaving uniform. It's pulling north. Look at the last 3 gauge deltas. Not now. Salas. Sir. She named the exact failure mode in our own model. How does a Times janitor Times name the failure mode in our model? And for 1 second, 1 human second, Dale Corrigan's certainty cracks. Because he is a bad man in this story, but he is not a man who wants a town to drown. And the question lands, how did she know? That is the second the command channel radio squawks and the EOC's comms officer goes pale and says, "Dale, it's the state director." She says, "Hold all crew movements and get the consultant back inside." She says the woman you removed is Dr. Odessa Lattimore. Corrigan's hand stops on the map. Lattimore. She says, "It's times the times, Lattimore." She says, "Dale." She says the stall index is times hers. She built the model we're running. The state director is ordering her back at this table, or we are all relieved tonight. For a moment, no one in the EOC moves. The radios crackle. The river rises. And the most confident man in the building stands frozen over a map with his crews in the wrong place. Beginning. Far too late. To understand, it is Renee Salas who moves. She is at the door before anyone tells her to, hauling it open against the wind. And she says into the rain, to the woman standing under the awning in the parking lot, "Dr. Lattimore, please, come back. Tell us where." And Dr. Odessa Lattimore does not say one word to Dale Corrigan. She is back at the map table in seconds. Soaked, her finger on the North Reach. And she does the thing her grandmother taught her on a bank at midnight. Translated now into the thing the room can act on. Pull the crews off the south wall, all of them. Now, and get them to the north. Reach at the Dawson. Cut. You're not going to save the wall. The wall's going... What you're going to do is buy minutes and use them. Sound the evacuation for everything below the north. Reach Sable Bend. River Road. The landing flats. Times now. Not after the next briefing. Now. The water tops the North Bank in. She looks at the gauge deltas. Renee turns toward her. And she does the math her grandmother did with her ears about 70 minutes. Everybody below that line needs to be on high ground at the church and the school before then. Renee, your deltas were right. Stay on them. Call the timing with me. On whose authority? Someone starts. On mine, says a voice from the door. Audrey, the state director. Soaked. Finally arrived. Badge out. Doctor, Lattimore has operational authority on the hydrology as of right now. Do what she says. Move. The EOC moves. The crews pull off the south wall at 9:58 and reach the north reach at 10:21. They do not save the levee. Adensprzik, Chaspur, M. 4 minutes inside Odessa Lattimore's window, the Seraw River overtops the north reach at the old Dawson Cut. Exactly where Vesta Lattimore's hand-drawn arrow said, "Times water comes here, times in 1955. And the levee goes. And the river takes back the channel it was straightened out of. In 1961, and Sable Bend floods to the roof lines. And the town is empty. Because the evacuation Odessa called at 9:68 minutes before the failure got everyone out. The crews who couldn't save the wall spent the minutes she bought them pulling people off River Road and out of the landing flats. 4,000 people are at the church, and the school, and the high ground shelters. Wet and frightened and alive. Watching the water take their homes on somebody's phone, when it should have taken them in their beds. Not one person in Sable Bend dies. In 1955, the county trusted its gauge, and 11 people drowned downstream while a black woman walked her own settlement out with her ears. In 2024, an incident commander trusted his tool and almost lost 4,000. Until that woman's granddaughter was dragged out of the command center, and then, barely, let back in to do what her grandmother did, read the river, and walk the people out. Renee Salas is standing at the watch desk at 11:06 when the North Reach fails on the live gauge feed. Exactly when and where, Odessa said. She has been recording on her phone since she opened the door for her. She watches the gauge flatline into failure. She watches an empty town flood. She thinks about the south wall they would have died defending. And she uploads the clip, the shove. Get the janitor out. Spliced against the empty flooded town and the 4,000 alive at the shelters at 11:40 p.m. By morning, 2 million views. By the next afternoon, Wit million. Real talk. What wrecks people about this one isn't even the slur. Though Times who let a janitor in here Times is bad. It's the timestamp. You watch a man scream that an old black woman is a janitor and throw her into the rain, and then you watch the levee fail at 11:06 exactly where she said it would. Over a town that is empty because they finally listened to her. Barely. With minutes to spare. You watch a man nearly drown 4,000 people to protect his idea of who's allowed to read a river. People can sit with cruelty. They cannot sit with cruelty that almost emptied a town into the water. Number she read the river trends by 9. The next morning used 470,000 times in a day. By people who know what it is to hold the warning in a room that won't take it. A retired lineman in Louisiana. I told them which pole would go in the storm. They listened after it fell on the school. I'd flagged it in writing. A nurse in a flood town. The old folks always know before the sirens. We learned to watch the woman down the road. Not the app. A man whose grandmother lived on a river. She called the floods by the smell of the mud. The county called it superstition. Her name was Cora. But there's a river woman in every one of these towns. Nobody wrote her name down. The county issues a statement at 11 a.m. It is 82 words long. It is grateful that no lives were lost in last night's catastrophic flooding. Commends the tireless work of our emergency crews and command staff, and is reviewing a communications matter from the operations floor as part of standard after-action procedure. 82 words. No name. No apology to the person. It commends the command staff, the institution claiming the save, while erasing the woman who made it and the analyst who defied the commander to call her back. It does not say times the incident commander shoved the consultant into the rain while the town's fate hung on her. It does not use the words times shoved, or times dragged, or per janitor. It does not say times doctor. Lattimore's call saved 4,000 lives. The word times black times does not appear. In an 8-2 Word document about a thing that happened to a black woman because a director decided what a black woman in a wet coat could know. Odessa releases no statement. But that night, at Obt, an account in her name, never used, posts 2 photographs. The first, a hand-drawn map on yellowed paper. A settlement of small squares labeled Times Lattimore Landing, and an arrow at the north bend in an old woman's hand, reading Times, water comes here. The second, a 1,991 notebook cover. Equations bleeding through from the page beneath. And in the corner, oh, Lattimore. The caption is one sentence. My grandmother, Vesta Lattimore, walked our whole settlement out of the 1,955 flood with her own 2 ears, while the county's gauge said safe. The model that saved Sable Bend last night is mine, built on what she taught me. Credited to a man for 30 years. The water always tells the truth. People lie about the water. That post is shared too, 3 million times in 3 days. The contempt has only changed clothes. The shove was not the contempt. The shove was just the part the camera caught. The first withdrawal lands at 9:30 a.m. Saturday. It is not a sponsor. There are none in an EOC. It is heavier. The State Emergency Management Agency, Audra Vay's own, announces it is removing the county from Independent Incident Command pending a full review. By noon, the federal agency that funds the county's hazard mitigation program opens an inquiry. Bidvape M. The engineering society that gave the late Dr. Warren Stahl its lifetime award announces it is reviewing the attribution of the Stahl Index. Bichteri P. M. The Regional River Authority, Odessa's old employer, votes to open its own historical attribution review of the index. Accountability is gravity, not vengeance. Odessa causes none of it. She does no interviews. On Saturday evening, she drives the rain. Stop now. The river falling to the high ground above the drowned flats. To the spot where the church stood in 1955 and where 4,000 people stood last night. And she looks down at the water sitting over Sable Bend. And she does not feel triumph. She feels grief. 69 years. Her grandmother walked a settlement out of this same water with her ears, and the record called it luck, and the men levied the river with her stolen knowledge and put no name on any of it. Last night a town lived because of what Vesta knew. And the whole valley is saying the river took the North Reach just like the models predicted. And Vesta Lattimore is not here to hear anyone finally admit she was never lucky. She was right. She was always right. Her phone rings. Odrave, Dr. Lattimore, I have to ask you something. And you can tell me to hang up. The index. Stahl. Did the agency Times know Times it was your work? Before tonight? Odra. Odessa says, your own young analyst couldn't find the author's name in the documentation because somebody scrubbed it. That doesn't happen by accident. The question was never whether anyone knew. The question is how many other rivers are being read tonight off of work somebody took a name off of. A long breath. The agency wants you to lead the review. The index. The attribution. The county's command failures. Will you? That, Odessa says, depends entirely on whether they want to find the truth, or just want my name on the cover so it looks found. Lourdes Fenn is a 48-year-old environment and disaster reporter at the Times, Ledger Times, who has been circling the River Authority for 10 months. Her tip came in the spring, from a retired authority records clerk named Cora Mabe, who told Lourdes that the authority had for decades quietly buried the question of who actually built the Stahl Index. The authority knew there were 1,991 review files. There was Stahl's own correspondence that the model was the work of a junior hydrologist named Lattimore. And let the Stahl name stand, because Stahl was the division director. Because correcting it would have meant admitting a black woman built the region's flagship flood tool, and the agency took it. And because the longer it stood, the more expensive the truth became. And it wasn't only the index. The authority had a long pattern of attributing the fieldwork and insight of its black and female staff to the white men who supervised them. Going back to the 1955 report that called Vesta Lattimore's evacuation, fortunate local awareness. Lourdes had been pulling threads. She had a source in the records. She had a list. She was waiting. She is no longer waiting. On Saturday, she finds Odessa on the high ground above the water. She does not ask for an interview. She lays a folder on the wet grass between them, the 1,991 review files showing the index logged under Times O. Lattimore Times before the attribution changed, the correspondence in which the change was made, and a list of 9 other instances over 50 years where the authority credited the work of its black or female staff to a supervisor's name. And clipped to the top, because she found it and could not show her, the 1,955 county flood report. The line highlighted, low mortality in the North Bend attributed to fortunate local awareness. Odessa reads that line a long time. She does not cry. She did her crying on this high ground years ago. Fortunate local awareness, she says quietly. My grandmother walked 60 souls out of the dark with her own feet, and they wrote Times fortunate. Like the river got shy. Like luck has a name, and it isn't Vesta. She hands it back. They took her knowledge to build the wall, and they took my model to run it, and they never once let either of us hold the pen. 9 more names on that list. Ms. Fenn. 9 more people who read the river and watched a man's name go on it. She looks down at the flooded town her grandmother's knowledge just saved a second time. They never imagined the janitor they threw in the rain, wrote the model that emptied that town, or that her grandmother called the same flood 69 years ago with no model at all. The counterattack begins Tuesday, and it is exactly as vile as the genre promises, and it dies fast. Because a town is alive and a levee failed on camera exactly where she said, Dale Corrigan, through the county's insurer and a crisis firm. Fires off Tuesday, a defamation demand against Renee Salas for recording on a secure operations floor. Against the Times Ledger Times, which has not published a word. And against Odessa, on the theory that her unauthorized, badgeless entry into an active command center during a life safety emergency constituted a dangerous interference, and that her claim to have called the evacuation is a self-aggrandizing distortion of a team effort. They flip it. The woman thrown into the rain becomes the dangerous interference. The man who threw her becomes the steward of command integrity. The demand insists Renee surrender her phone and her note, and insists Odessa produce the original 1,991 notebook and her grandmother's so-called map for forensic authentication by the firm's chosen examiner. That is, it demands the proof of the theft be handed to the people with the most reason to bury it again. Renee gets the letter Tuesday night. She is 24. She has a probationary job, student loans, and a commander who signs her evaluations. She sits on her apartment floor and shakes for an hour and does not delete 1 second of footage. The manufactured accounts bloom 11 of them, but they have nothing to stand on against a town full of eyewitnesses and a levee that failed on the live gauge feed at 11:06. Lattimore staged it for fame. The 1,991 notebook is forged. The authorities own 1,991 review files with her name. Surface within the week. Times. The evacuation would have happened anyway. The EOC timeline. Timestamped. Shows the South Wall hold until 9:58 and the evac call at 9:50 by Lattimore. It is not ambiguous. Times, Renee Salas is a disgruntled probie. She isn't. The screenshots carry metadata from the day they were made. Metadata, metadata, metadata. And then the smear finds the soft place. A Wire reporter calls Miss Lurline Pace 84, the woman who followed Odessa into the rain, and asks her, with oily gentleness, whether she's Times really sure, at her age, in the dark and the storm, that she saw a hydrologist get shoved, or whether she might be confused by a frightening night. Miss Lurline Pace is 84. Her voice on the phone does not shake. Young man, I was 6 years old in 1955 when the Syrah came over the bank and took my family's house down to the roof. I am alive to take your foolish phone call because a woman named Vesta Lattimore walked into our settlement in the dark and the rain and carried me out on her own back to the church before the county knew a thing was wrong. The county said we were Times lucky. I was not lucky. I was carried, and the night before last, that same woman's granddaughter got carried out of that command center by a deputy, while she tried to do the exact same thing her grandmother did for me. So you ask me, am I Times sure? I have been sure for 69 years. Now, is there some other thing you'd like me to be too old to remember being carried out of? The reporter hangs up. He does not write the story. But Lurline, after she hangs up, does not feel victorious. She sits in a borrowed chair at the shelter, her own house under the water, and she thinks about being 6 and carried, and about how she spent 69 years saying she'd been Times, lucky Times, because that's what the report said, and never once said the name of the woman who carried her. She takes out a sheet of paper and writes, in a careful hand, Dr. Lattimore, your grandmother carried me out of the 1,955 flood when I was 6. The county called it luck. It was her. I will say what I saw the other night, and what your grandmother did. Under oath. Anywhere. For as long as I have breath. Lurline Pace. One of the carried. She mails it Thursday. Odessa reads it on the high ground. It is the thing that decides her on what comes next. That night, Odessa sits alone above the falling river, her grandmother's map and her own notebook on the seat beside her. The smear has called her dangerous and a fraud in 48 hours. She is 73, and she read the river right, and they nearly drowned a town to keep her out of the room. She thinks, for the first time. Whether forcing it all into the light is worth what it's costing. The 24-year-old analyst and the 84-year-old being asked to doubt her own memory. and her grandmother's voice comes back. From a bank at midnight, the water never lies. Baby. People lie about the water. You learn to hear it. And when you know, you don't wait for permission. You walk the people out. You don't ever wait for permission. This is the floor. From here it goes one way. The turn comes Friday. And it comes from the last person anyone expects. Dr. Glenn Ashby. 61. The River Authority's current chief scientist, the man who holds the chair Warren Stahl held. The keeper of the institution that took the index. Glenn Ashby has been at the authority 34 years. He came up under Warren Stahl. He has known, longer than he has admitted, that the index was Lattimore's. He was a junior engineer in 1991, down the hall, and he saw the notebook with her name on it, and he saw the name come off, and he said nothing. Because he was young and Stahl was the director, and the model worked, and the river didn't care whose name was on it. He told himself that, for 34 years, the sight of her thrown into the rain, and a town that nearly drowned because a man wouldn't hear her, is what makes it unbearable. On Friday morning, Dr. Glenn Ashby walks into the Times Ledger S offices with a banker's box. Inside, the 1,991 review files, with the model logged under Times O, Lattimore Times, and the attribution change order that swapped it to Times Stahl Index. Signed by Stahl. A 1,996 internal memo in which a younger Glenn Ashby tepidly asked the division whether the index attribution should be revisited. Answered by a supervisor in one line. The index is Stahl's division product, and that is settled. Don't reopen it. Glenn, it's not a good look for your career. And the email. The one Lourdes had heard rumors of and never seen. Sent 11 days. No. 2 days after the flood. Before the clip had fully broken. From Dale Corrigan to 2 county colleagues. Subject line. Times. The EOC situation. The body. In full. Is greater than, I don't care if she turns out to be the state's consultant. A badgeless woman in street clothes walked into my active command center during a life safety event, and I removed her per protocol. Full stop. And I'd do it again. The town got evacuated. Fine. My crews executed. The optics are bad, but I am not going to stand up and say some old woman in a wet coat read my river better than my command staff did. Because that is not a precedent. This office survives. Keep it on communications matter. And do not concede that her call was what saved the town, that the evacuation timing came from her. That stays out of every statement. D. Do not concede that her call was what saved the town. There it is. Not a panicked split second in a crashing EOC. A decision, in his own words, typed 2 days after a town nearly drowned, by a man who times still, after the levee failed exactly where she said, called her some old woman in a wet coat and ordered her name kept out of the record on purpose. Because being saved by her was the one thing his command couldn't survive. The command center contempt and the cover-up contempt are one contempt, the same machine that called Vesta's evacuation, fortunate local awareness in 1955, and scrubbed Odessa's name off the index in 1,991 and threw Odessa into the rain in 2024. It never stopped. It just usually kept it off email. Lourdes Finn verifies everything in 4 hours. She publishes Friday at 6:30 p.m. The headline, Do not concede her call saved the town. How an agency erased the woman who built its flood model and the grandmother who read the river first. The story is 300 words. It runs the EOC timeline to the minute. The 1,991 attribution change order. The 1,996 times don't reopen it times memo. The times that stays out times email. The period authenticated 1,991 notebook and Vesta's 1,955 map. The 1,955 times Fortunate Local Awareness Times report. The 9 other erased names. And Lurline Pace's signed statement. It runs Vesta Lattimore's hand-drawn arrow. Times water comes here, times beside. The live gauge feed showing the North Reach failing at 11:06. 69 years and one valley apart. The same water. The same bend. The same woman's family calling it. By midnight, the Times ledgers. Servers have crashed twice. It is the most read story in the paper's history. Dale Corrigan is removed as incident commander and placed on leave Saturday, not reassigned, but a release, forced by the state over the firm's objection. Using the words Times, relieved for cause, and Times, the county acknowledges that Dr. Odessa Lattimore's hydrological assessment and evacuation call saved the town, and that she was wrongfully removed from the command center. And Times, the surge model in use, is the work of Dr. Lattimore. The exact sentence Corrigan ordered kept out is the sentence the county is forced to put in. The state moves to strip the county of independent command authority. The defamation demand is withdrawn Sunday in light of new information. Renee Salas's name, by Sunday night, is on a list of agencies trying to recruit her. And the Times ledger's readers have done a thing for her too. Faster than anyone can track, the agency offers Odessa a settlement Saturday afternoon, a substantial sum, a private apology, a confidentiality clause, a buried line acknowledging the consultant's contribution. Odessa reads it on the high ground above the draining town. She makes 3 calls, Lurline Pace, Odrave, Lord Fenn, and at Sync P.M. She sends back 1 page. Not a counteroffer. A list. No confidentiality clause. She strikes it first. Is greater than there will be no confidentiality clause. My grandmother's name was not for sale when they called her life's work. Luck in 1955. And mine was not for sale when they put another man's name on it in 1991. Neither is for sale now. Is greater than. Instead. 大于 E. The model is renamed in every agency that uses it. And in the journals, to its true authorship, the Lattimore Surge Index. And in its documentation, the 1,955 origin is told honestly that the river reading at its root came from Vesta Lattimore, who called the flood the gauges missed. Dayu. R. The 1,955 county flood report is corrected. The line Fortunate Local Awareness is struck. And the record states the truth, that Vesta Lattimore evacuated Lattimore Landing on her own knowledge, hours before the county knew, and saved every soul in the bend. Dayu. San. The other 9 erased attributions are reviewed. In full. In public, every name. The agency took off a piece of work and replaced with a supervisor's. However many river readers got called luck. 大于 4. The early warning system for this valley is rebuilt to listen to the people who live on the water, the old ones who read the river, and not only the gauges. Because the gauges were wrong in 1955, and the tool was wrong the other night. And the people on the bank were right both times. It is named the Vesta Lattimore Warning System. Dayu Wu. I will lead the review and the rebuild myself. Without a fee. Because someone has to make sure the next person who knows where the water will go gets heard before the levee fails. Whatever she's wearing, and I would rather it be me than another 69 years of luck. Da Yu. Lo. Dale Corrigan is not to be pursued, harassed, or contacted by me or on my behalf. He will face the state, and his own email, and his own mirror. I have no interest in him. I never did. I only ever wanted them to listen in time. The other night, barely, they did. And a town is alive. I want the next town to have more than barely. Dr. Odessa Lattimore. The agency accepts all 6 conditions within the week. 3 weeks later, when the water is gone and Sable Bend is digging out, they dedicate the warning system. There is no ceremony. Odessa refuses one. There are 9 people on the high ground above the bend, where the church stood in 1955, and 4,000 people stood the night of the flood. Odessa, Miss Lurline Pace, 84, who was carried out of these waters as a child, Audra Vey, Renee Salas, no longer a probationary analyst, but the first coordinator of a new community warning network, Odessa insisted on, whose entire job is to make sure the people who read the river get heard. Dr. Glenn Ashby, standing a little apart, the way a man stands when he has done a right thing 34 years late and knows it doesn't buy back the years, and a handful of the carried people who got out the night of the flood because an old woman in a wet coat was let back into a room with minutes to spare, on a stone set into the high ground, where everyone who comes up to watch the river will read it. The cut letters say, "The Vesta Lattimore Warning System." She read the Syrah in 1955 and walked her people out while the gauges said safe. They called it luck. It was her. The water always tells the truth. Now Sodeva. Miss Lurline Pace reads it. She is 84, and she was 6 the night the woman on that stone carried her out of the dark. And she traces the name. Vesta Lattimore. The name she finally knows. And she asks, the only thing there is to ask. Was she, when she carried me? Was she afraid? And Dr. Odessa Lattimore, 73, who heard the story of that night at her grandmother's knee 100 times, looks at her, not at the stone, at her, and says, "Quiet." She wasn't afraid. She told me about you, the little Pace girl who wouldn't let go of her neck. Odessa's voice does not break. She has had a lifetime to make it not break. She said you held on so tight she couldn't have put you down if she'd wanted to. And she didn't want to. Because you do not put a child down in the water. You carry her to the high ground. You don't wait for permission, and you don't let go. She touches the stone, the cut letters of her grandmother's name. She wasn't afraid because she was busy. She was carrying you. That's the truth of her. She heard the river talking low, and she went and got the people. Every time. And she carried the ones who couldn't walk. Lurline Pace puts her hand flat on the stone. On Vesta's name. Odessa puts her hand beside it. The hand that read the river the night it saved Lurline a second time. Renee Salas looks at the falling water. None of them say anything else. Because there is nothing else to say. Below them, the Syrah is back in its banks, though not the banks the engineers straightened it into in 1961. It took back the old North Channel the night of the flood. The channel Vesta always said it wanted, and the valley has decided, this time, to let it keep it. The light comes down on the water. The same light that came down on a river woman walking a settlement out of the dark 69 years ago. The river has not changed. It still tells the truth. The reading of it has not changed. Only the name on it has changed. And the name is enough. Real talk, Doctor. Odessa Lattimore could have taken the money and the quiet apology and gone home. And not one soul on earth would have blamed her. 69 years. A grandmother whose life's work the record called luck. A model the whole region runs under a dead man's name. She didn't take it. She stayed. She put her grandmother's name on the warning system and struck the word times luck, times from the 1,955 report, and made them tell the truth about a woman who walked 60 souls out of the dark. She put her own name back on the index. She made them open the other 9 drawers and find every river reader they'd called lucky. She built a system that listens to the people on the bank, and not just the gauges. Because the people on the bank were right both times. And she stood on the high ground and told an 84-year-old woman that the woman who carried her out of the water as a child wasn't afraid. Because she was busy carrying her. And Renee Salas, 24, 8 months on the desk. Everything to lose contradicted her commander on the floor of his own EOC because an old woman in a wet coat named the failure mode from the model's own documentation, and Renee was the only one who listened to the answer. Instead of the rank, nobody had her back when she did it. A town is alive because a young analyst decided the truth mattered more than the man refusing to hear it. That's the part that doesn't make the headline. The contempt didn't start in a command center, and it won't end with cut stone. Somewhere tonight, a river is rising. And the person who can read it, the old one on the bank, who knows, the water talks low before it talks loud, is being waved off for her coat, her age, her skin. Filed under times, janitor times, in under a second by someone who trusts the gauge over the grandmother. Sometimes the woman in the wet coat built the model on your screen. Sometimes the person you just decided couldn't possibly know is the only one who can hear the water telling the truth. If you have ever known how to stop the disaster in a room that decided you couldn't possibly know, drop one word in the comments. We'll know what it means. And if this moved you, share it with someone who needs to know. The water always tells the truth. People lie about the water. The water never does. Her name was Vesta Lattimore. It's on the system now. Say it.